Hi folks, welcome to Iceland and welcome to the Norton Atlas launch. This is a pretty cool bike from a pretty cool company. Norton's been around for a long time, but they were recently purchased by TVS, the motorcycle giant out of India, and this is their sort of middleweight adventure-y, do-anything motorcycle offering. So, can this bike do anything, or is it kind of stuck in a no man's land? Well, speaking of no man's land, let's head out here in Iceland, swing a leg over this bike, and go for a ride. All right, first contact with the Norton Atlas. We're in the middle of the press launch and all that stuff, and it's a good looking little bike, you know? Let's get her turned on. Go for neutral. 585cc parallel twin 270 crank comes to life. Some cool engineering that we'll talk about with this bike, but pretty zesty little throttle. Take a listen. It sounds almost identical to my Touareg 660, but in this day and age, you know, a 270 crank twin is kind of like, I don't know, probably the most common engine architecture. Quick shift up and down, nice and easy. Got several ride modes, and it's like, it's a very standard feeling motorcycle with above standard fit and finish. That's kind of the first impressions of it, you know? It moves pretty nice for 585 cc's. It's tuned to have a very nice hit of torque down low. You know, it is interesting. I talk a lot about how manufacturers, the final fit and finish of a motorcycle is always the hardest, you know? And not necessarily in materials and in building and design, like, because this bike is put together very nicely. Like, look at the cable routing, look at the panel gaps here. The screen's a little too big for my liking, but that's the way everything's going. I could have done with like a 5.5 inch, not an 8 inch TFT display, but everybody's trying to do the biggest displays possible. But I think that final bit of precision and handling and fit and finish in the actual motorcycle, not the design of it, is the hardest part. It's when the bike is, you know, like that last little on-off throttle feeling and the calibration of all the systems, like, because nobody does ride by cable anymore, everything's ride by wire, you have to dial it in so well, and the kind of computer and software elements of building a motorcycle have become so critically important. And Norton, for being a smaller company, I mean, they've been recently revitalized by TVS, which is a really big company. It's pretty good. I would rate it like an 8.8 out of 10 for such a small company, but it lacks that last 10% that you get from a Honda or an Aprilia or a Ducati. You know, that it just has that ultra precise feeling, because the throttle is the number one connection, right? And for me, if I don't believe in that throttle 100%, if I don't really think it's going to do what it needs to do, then I don't have faith in the motorcycle. The confidence goes down a little bit. And this bike does some of those things where, you know, you enter a braking zone and you roll off the throttle. It's not always completely consistent as to what the engine braking is doing and what the motor is doing. Quick shifter system works really nicely. Auto blip down is really nice on this bike. Let's pick it up a teensy bit here into the braking zone. Dude, for how big this company is, this is really impressive. I've seen much worse motorcycles coming from much larger companies. This is genuinely impressive. And what a place to test it, huh? Iceland. Not many people can say they've ridden a motorcycle on this tiny little island, but here I am, baby. Not too shabby for the old Yamster. Not too bad. And see, just right there, you know, off the gas, and it feels like it's still going forward for some reason, like in an unpredictable type of way. What a great road. Very nice. A good environment to test this motorcycle. You know, it's wet and cold and crappy today. It's windy as hell. Its road condition is, I would say, like a 6 out of 10. And so it's not exactly the nicest environment, but that's what this bike is built for. It's supposed to be a long distance style machine, an everyday do anything kind of bike. and it does okay. I think it also is bucking the trend a little bit that you need a 21-inch front end and you need wire spoke wheels and super aggressive knobby tires. I mean, you could probably save that for the, you know, T7 guys. This is much less of something like that and something more of like what I would want Honda to build in their CB500X products, you know, something that is everyday capable and everyday adventure, but realistic in its delivery and execution. And honestly, I talk a lot about how engines are the star of the show for every motorcycle, and this 585cc twin is great. It really is great. It's got a lot of pep, a lot of zest, a lot of character. Revs out nicely. It's very free revving. Doesn't feel like a lazy engine at all, and you know, it's a weird displacement for sure, and I still can't make heads or tails of why they decided to go with 585 of all displacements, you know? It puts it in kind of a weird category too, because, you know, it's not exactly competing in that 600 to 700cc range, and it's not exactly in the 300 to 500cc range. It's kind of in between. And I've noticed motorcycle companies keep trying to do this where they're like, all right, we're going to carve, you know, a brand new path for ourselves here. And, you know, it remains to be seen if this is going to be a size and a path for other companies to follow. But honestly, from the seat of the pants, you know, it's basically 600 cc's parallel twin. It feels strong like a CP2, you know? It has a little less torque, not much, honestly. It's 42 foot-pounds over like 50, or 40, you know, 49 that the CP2 makes. But it's a little more free revving than the CP2, and it's a little more just, you get a little more of that honk, you get a little more of that emotion out of it. It's pretty cool.
In motorcycling, one of our new favorite buzzwords is cross-platform. That's when a manufacturer takes an engine, parts, chassis, or a combination of all three and creates several different motorcycles with them. But what if you could apply this same principle to camera tech? Why shouldn't your action camera, your 360 camera, or even your pocket-sized gimbal all sync up seamlessly with one mic system? Oh yeah, and why not make that system wireless? That's the benefit of the DJI ecosystem, and it's one of my favorite things about using their tech. When I need to shoot a POV portion on one of our videos using the Action 6, I just throw the mic mini into my helmet, it magnetizes, and it wirelessly syncs up. Then I get off my bike, I can boot up the Pocket 3, and the mic mini will wirelessly sync to that too. I really can't stress just how easy it is to use the whole ecosystem. Everything just works, and it's made creating way more fun. I don't have to load up an entire DSLR and a tripod and a whole audio rig to go shoot on the road. It makes taking the show on the road way lighter, way simpler, and way more enjoyable. I recommend starting with the Action 6 and a mic mini. That's basically a complete creator pack right there. Then you can upgrade to the 360 and get those epic shots on the bike. And then finally, go for a Pocket 3 for a mobile, stable, studio-grade solution to shooting off the bike content. Because what, you're just making moto vlogs? Come on, you gotta step it up. Check out everything DJI has to offer using the link in the description below and get started creating using the most fun camera systems in the game. Thanks to them for the support. Now let's get back to the show.
All right, let's sit down and think critically about this bike. I rode the Atlas for about 200 kilometers or 120 miles in a variety of terrain and conditions, so I got pretty familiar with it. If I had to pick one word to describe it, I'd say optimized. You've probably noticed we're coalescing around a very specific style of motorcycle in the modern age. It's a parallel twin with a 270 crank displacing somewhere between 450 and 700 cc's, making like 50 to 100 horsepower and some spicier products. Nearly every manufacturer currently offers at least one bike with this configuration, if not several with varying cross platforms. And it all makes sense. Parallel twins are cheap to produce, flexible to utilize in a variety of motorcycle styles, and the 270 crank gives them a kind of V-twin-like character that's pretty satisfying to use. The Norton Atlas represents a potential total optimization of what a Swiss Army knife bike could be for the widest possible audience. It's a little sporty, a little commuter-y, a little adventure-y. However, motorcycles like this can very quickly get into the trap of a jack of all trades and master of none. It's a formula that's been arguably perfected by something like a Versys 650, the mid-sized crossover of the motorcycle world. The thing is, when you ride bikes like the Versys or the CB500X or the NC750, it's almost as if the engineers willingly crafted these bikes to be boring. They have a lazy chassis and geometry combined with sleepy engines, which kind of gives you the vibe of a workhorse piece of farm equipment rather than a fun bike you're meant to ride and enjoy. The core of a motorcycle is the engine. I mean, it's right in the name, right? Motorcycle. Although I guess engine cycle would be more accurate, but semantics aside, I judge a bike first and foremost by its engine. And the Norton Atlas has one of the most dynamic and free-revving parallel twins on the market, rivaling the 659cc motor that Aprilia uses, which is one of my favorites and in my opinion, one of the class leaders. Despite being a new manufacturer, Norton has prowess in building engines, and they've leveraged their new and very deep pockets powered by TVS to produce a truly fun and spirited little motor. They start with the design from the BMW F450 GS, which is built in partnership with TVS, and they modify the bore and stroke to get it to that rather weird 585 cc's of displacement and ends up over square. We like that. Then they do a lot of clever engineering to maximize the free-revving nature. They're using plasma technology in the cylinder walls to reduce friction. They have a dual oil pump system and plenty of other fun changes to give the engine that kind of free-revving zip to the redline. It also features a cassette-style transmission that can be removed from the side of the engine rather than tearing the whole thing apart to service it. That's a nice touch. The bike also has a hollow swing arm with a variable internal wall thickness to allow for further tunability. And that's something this bike has in common with a Ducati Panigale V4, for example. It's pretty rarefied air. It's pretty clear that one of the most important elements to these new Norton products is the design, and in an age where attention is our currency, you need to stand out. I was pleasantly surprised by the shapes of the Manx R when it debuted, without any cuts in the fairings, winglets, or brake ducts. It looks pretty good. And the Atlas follows that up and gives the all-rounder category some pretty nice sex appeal. The side panel, for example, has just one bolt and some seriously tight tolerances for the gaps. The fit and finish here is at a really high level, and it's in places where you'll notice and see it. When you're riding, you can see the routing of the cables, neat and tidy down past the triple tree. The windshield adjuster, stock by the way with 3 positions, has 2 very clean little tabs you can press. Even the handguards have a kind of extra shielding on the inside, which is something you'll see every time you ride. To be honest, I know it probably would have been a little too expensive, but I think a more bespoke looking dash could have really set this bike apart. I personally think we're nearing the end of the slap an iPad on top of the ignition and call it a day era, and I can't wait for that to be over. Because I think the first manufacturer to do an old school double round gauge setup, but in a modern way, is gonna win big time. Porsche and Audi had some awesome systems a few years ago before they switched to full digital, and even something like Bugatti's new clusters are pretty interesting. The screens are quickly becoming quite gauche. I don't think they're gonna age very well, and the big ones just kind of elicit a cheap Chinese EV sort of vibe. Just my 2 cents. Heated grips come standard, which was very handy during my very cold, wet, and windy testing of this bike. They have 3 adjustable levels, and they're all pretty warm. When you ride a motorcycle that isn't from one of the big mainstream brands, the differences may not be immediately apparent. Power output, specification, components, on paper, it looks like they can take it to the big guys, no problem. Despite having the backing of TVS, Norton is still a really small and passionate team, and there's just simply not the same level of manpower to comb through all the finer details. There's little things like the keyless ignition system being a bit wonky, taking a long time to boot up, or always requiring you to unlock the bike with the key fob every time you turn it back on and having no way of disabling that feature, as far as I could tell. The gas cap is keyless, but it's very finicky to get back to completely closed. Again, keyed ignition and a keyed gas cap, these are solved problems. I don't know why we're trying to reinvent the wheel here. The ride modes are not deeply customizable, and they function mostly as a set it and forget it. You can't change throttle maps or anything else by mode. And you contrast that with other offerings from bigger manufacturers that give you more flexibility for throttle mappings, engine braking, or even quick shifter settings, independent of those ride modes. As I mentioned in my ride, there's a sort of like final 5 to 10% of refinement missing from the throttle. And for me, the connection to the throttle is the number one touch point that has to be dialed in on any motorcycle. If the engine is the most important, then the throttle has to be the most important input. At constant throttle in lower speeds, the bike is just a little confused. It lurches forward or responds in sort of unpredictable ways. I don't mind when a throttle doesn't work exactly the way I prefer, but it's a little frustrating when it works differently in different conditions. A throttle has to be consistent, smooth, and predictable to enable satisfying riding. And I believe Norton can fix this with some over-the-air updates, or maybe you can just get this bike and flash it for your market's specific gas type, elevation, exhaust changes, whatever you gotta do. Because we're in a world where nearly every single new motorcycle needs to be flashed to be enjoyed properly. And a quick note about the bike's off-road prowess: it can handle gravel roads up to about 110 kph or like 70 miles per hour with no problems at all. The bike is set up pretty firm and sporty from the factory, and while it has 7 inches of travel out of a 43mm fork, it can handle some pretty decent bumps. I think it has a realistic performance envelope for the sort of off-road riding someone would realistically do with it. Where this setup comes in handy is over potholes and speed bumps, giving you extra comfort and capability over a standard roadster naked bike. So, it's a mid-capacity, stylish all-rounder with a pretty tasty engine built by a smaller company that's focused on design and powered by an Indian giant. Who is the customer for this bike? I'm gonna stick to the American market since it's the one I know best. I could see someone picking up one of these who's willing to take a chance on something different. Maybe it's an additional motorcycle in their stable that they can just jump on and go. Or maybe a bike that they would feel comfortable having to let someone else in their life ride while they ride their larger and more expensive bike. But I think, interestingly enough, that's the crux of this bike. We're seeing the broader industry trend that for the first time, motorcycle riders are arriving to the sport later in life. Guys in their 40s and 50s who put off motorcycling until their kids were done with high school, and now they can convince the wife it's time to yeet themselves on 2 wheels with wanton abandon. The entry-level category for a long time did not serve these guys, and sometimes they would be led astray by the clarion call of a blacked-out GS that they have no business riding. So maybe the Norton Atlas finds itself at home with this customer. Someone who has a lot of time to ride, wants to put some miles down, wants something beautiful that they can own, and has a fit and finish that is commensurate with their other old guy hobbies. You know, like carbon road bikes, nice kitchen knives, Porsches, that sort of thing. And with about 70 horsepower on tap, it's a lively bike that could keep someone interested for a while and grow into before the call for the GS becomes too powerful to ignore. It's a niche market and maybe it'll work. One of the things I really enjoyed hearing from the Norton team was that they are not afraid to fail. People love to say, oh, they're gonna make that bike and no one's gonna buy it. Okay, and Norton can learn from that. Failure is a necessary part of growth, discovery, and eventual success. We've all become too risk-averse, man, and it's ironic that a crowd of motorcyclists, people who are infamous for being poor analysts of risk versus reward, keep parroting this idea. The team at Norton, buoyed by their partnership with TVS, are now allowed to try new things, take risks, and we all benefit from that. They kind of have like a little safe environment to try stuff. You could say that creating a parallel twin all-rounder is the least riskiest thing they could do, but they gotta start somewhere. Norton has gone bankrupt 11 times in its 100-year history, and it's a shame for a company with so much pedigree and history to find itself relegated to the dustbin of history until very recently. Reinvention and restructuring is as much a part of their DNA as their commitment to innovation, which is what they say is their modus operandi. I think it's fitting that they launched the Atlas in Iceland, not only for the beautiful and stark scenery, but also for the historical parallels. Iceland was a place that was a sleepy Viking outpost for hundreds of years. Then it was annexed by a Norwegian king, then the Danish, and then the British arrived wanting to set up an air base for their efforts in World War II, only to then be usurped by the Americans, who ultimately helped Iceland become what it is today. It's a sort of hockey stick trajectory, aided by the right players, the right conditions, and the right time. Is Norton finally in this era? Did they spend decades in the shadows waiting for the right moment? Is this partnership with TVS the tipping point to getting back to where the company should be? I'm not sure, but their motto seems to be, screw it, we're gonna give it a go. And I can respect that. Thanks for checking out today's video, and a big shout out to Norton for inviting me to the launch of the Atlas. What do you guys think of this bike? Sound off in the comments. I always appreciate hearing from you. Let me know if you think I'm on base, off base, whatever base you think I'm on. I'll catch you in the next one. See you later.